Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in life when heaven's attention shifts in your direction and God says, I have chosen you. This is not a moment to be taken lightly. It's a divine appointment that carries eternal significance. When God chooses someone, it is never a random act. Divine selection is always tied to purpose. This truth echoes throughout the pages of history and Scripture. God's actions are intentional, His plans are deliberate, and His choices are strategic. To understand the depth of being chosen by God, we must first recognize that His selection is rooted in a divine purpose far greater than human understanding. It is a calling not just to personal greatness, but to fulfill a specific role in the unfolding story of His kingdom. When God chooses you, it is because there is something inside you that aligns with a heavenly assignment. It is not about your current abilities, status, or qualifications. In fact, more often than not, God's choice defies human logic. Consider the life of David, a young shepherd boy, overlooked by his own family. When the prophet Samuel came to anoint the next king of Israel, David wasn't even invited to the meeting. Yet God saw in David what no one else could see, a heart after His own. David's journey from tending sheep to leading a nation was a testament to the fact that divine selection is always purpose-driven. God's purpose for choosing you is deeply personal yet profoundly universal. It begins with your unique gifts, experiences, and passions, but it is always tied to something larger than yourself. God's choice is about advancing His plans on earth. This means that when you are chosen, you are called to rise above mediocrity and embrace a life of significance. Your life becomes a vehicle through which God's power, love, and wisdom are displayed. The truth is, being chosen by God often comes with a season of revelation. You may begin to notice that certain doors open for you while others close. Opportunities that once seemed impossible suddenly become accessible. These shifts are not coincidences, they are markers of divine alignment. When God chooses you, He orchestrates events and circumstances to position you for your purpose. The relationships you build, the challenges you face, and even the failures you endure are all part of His divine plan to prepare you for the assignment ahead. However, being chosen also requires a shift in mindset. It calls for a willingness to see yourself through God's eyes rather than the lens of human limitations. When Moses was chosen to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, his immediate response was to highlight his inadequacies. He said, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh?" But God's reply was simple, "I will be with you." Moses' story reminds us that divine selection is not based on our ability, but on God's presence in our lives. He does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. This understanding should fill us with both humility and confidence. On one hand, it humbles us to know that God's choice is not earned, it is a gift. On the other hand, it gives us confidence to step boldly into our calling, knowing that the one who chose us will also empower us. When God chooses you, He equips you with everything you need to fulfill your purpose. He gives you wisdom for decisions, strength for challenges, and grace for the journey. Yet the journey of being chosen is not without its difficulties. Often God's selection places you in situations where your faith is tested. Joseph, chosen by God to save his family and an entire nation, endured betrayal, slavery, and imprisonment before stepping into his destiny. These trials were not setbacks, they were setups for the fulfillment of His purpose. God uses the challenges we face to refine our character, deepen our faith, and prepare us for the weight of the calling. When God chooses you, He also sets you apart. This separation can be both exhilarating and isolating. You may find that your path diverges from those around you. What others can do with ease, you may not be able to do. This is not rejection, but protection. God sets you apart to preserve the uniqueness of your calling. Just as a sculptor chisels away excess stone to reveal the masterpiece within, God removes distractions and detours that could hinder your purpose. Being chosen also means being a vessel for God's glory. Your life becomes a testimony of His power and faithfulness. When people see what God accomplishes through you, they are drawn not to you, but to Him. This is why divine selection is never about personal gain, it is about kingdom impact. God chooses you not just to bless you, but to make you a blessing to others. Your obedience becomes the channel through which His love flows to the world. Finally, it is important to recognize that God's timing is integral to His selection. When He chooses you, the fulfillment of your purpose may not happen immediately. There is often a waiting period, a season of preparation. During this time, God is working behind the scenes, aligning people, places, and events to ensure that His plans are accomplished in the fullness of time. This requires patience and trust, knowing that He who began a good work in you will bring it to completion. In every instance, divine selection is tied to a purpose that transcends our understanding. When God chooses you, it is an invitation to partner with Him in transforming the world. It is a call to step into the extraordinary, to leave behind the mundane, and to embrace the destiny for which you were created. When God calls you, it is not merely an invitation to a task, it is a declaration that your life is meant to be different. To be called by God is to be set apart, marked for a purpose that goes beyond personal ambition or worldly recognition. This separation is not about isolation, but about distinction. It is about stepping into a life where your identity and actions reflect something higher, something eternal. God's calling sets you apart because it aligns you with His divine plan, positioning you for significance in ways you may not yet fully understand. Being set apart often begins with a sense of discomfort or a realization that you don't quite fit into the patterns of the world around you. What satisfies others may no longer satisfy you. You may find yourself drawn to pursuits and values that seem countercultural or even unpopular. This is not a coincidence. It is the evidence of God's hand on your life. When God calls you, He begins to reshape your desires, align your focus, and redirect your energy toward His purposes. This realignment may feel unsettling at first, but it is a necessary part of the process. Throughout Scripture and history, we see examples of individuals who were set apart by their calling. Take the story of Jeremiah, for instance. Before he was even born, God declared, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you before you were born. I set you apart." Jeremiah's calling was not something he stumbled upon. It was embedded in his very being. Yet this calling required him to walk a path that was anything but easy. He faced opposition, rejection, and loneliness. But his life was a testimony to the fact that being set apart often comes with a cost. When you are set apart, you may experience moments of solitude. This is not because you are unloved or unworthy, but because God is doing a unique work in your life that requires undivided attention. He often separates those He calls from the noise and distractions of the world to prepare them for their assignment. Moses, for example, spent years in the wilderness before he was ready to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. During that time, God was not punishing Moses, He was equipping him. The wilderness became the classroom where Moses learned dependence on God, humility, and leadership. This setting apart is also evident in the life of Jesus. Before He began His public ministry, He was led into the wilderness for 40 days. In that solitary place, He was tested, refined, and strengthened for the mission ahead. This pattern of preparation underscores an important truth. Being set apart is not about being removed from the world, but about being prepared to impact it. The wilderness seasons in your life are not meant to destroy you, but to refine you. They strip away what is unnecessary so that you can step into your calling with clarity and power. Being set apart also means embracing a higher standard. When God calls you, He calls you to live differently. This doesn't mean living in perfection, but it does mean living with intentionality. It means guarding your integrity, pursuing righteousness, and resisting the urge to conform to the patterns of this world. Daniel, chosen by God to serve in Babylon, is a prime example. Though he lived in a culture that was hostile to his faith, he remained steadfast. He refused to compromise his values, even when it put his life at risk. His faithfulness set him apart, and as a result, God elevated him to a position of influence. This elevation is another aspect of being set apart. When God calls you, He often places you in positions where your life can shine as a light in the darkness. This doesn't always mean standing on a stage or holding a title. It could mean being a source of encouragement in your workplace, a beacon of hope in your community, or a voice of truth in challenging situations. Whatever the context, your calling is meant to make a difference. God sets you apart not for your glory, but for His. Your life becomes a reflection of His love, power, and grace to the world around you. At times, being set apart can feel like a burden. You may wonder why your path seems more difficult than others. You may feel misunderstood or even ostracized. But these challenges are not signs of rejection. They are evidence of your calling. God's purpose for your life is too important to leave you unprepared. The trials you face are part of the refining process. They are shaping you into the person God needs you to be to fulfill your assignment. It's important to remember that being set apart is not just about what you do, but about who you are. God is more concerned with your character than your accomplishments. He calls you to be holy, to reflect His nature, and to walk in love, humility, and obedience. This inward transformation is what truly sets you apart. It is what enables you to carry out your calling with authenticity and impact. When God sets you apart, He also surrounds you with His presence. You are never alone in your calling. He goes before you, walks beside you, and strengthens you every step of the way. The journey may not always be easy, but it will always be worth it. To be set apart by God is to be chosen, equipped, and empowered for a purpose that is far greater than yourself. It is a life of meaning, impact, and eternal significance. Preparation is an essential prerequisite to elevation. In God's divine order, He never elevates without first preparing. The preparation process is not a mere formality, but a deliberate and purposeful season where He molds, refines, and equips us for the responsibilities and challenges that come with elevation. This process is often misunderstood or resisted because it can be uncomfortable, but it is a necessary journey that every individual chosen by God must undergo. It is through preparation that we become ready to carry the weight of our calling and step into the fullness of our destiny. The preparation phase often begins in obscurity. Before God brings someone into the spotlight or gives them a platform, He works on them behind the scenes. This hidden season is where character is developed, skills are honed, and faith is strengthened. David's life exemplifies this truth. Before he was anointed king, he spent years tending sheep in the fields. During this time, he learned to protect his flock, fight off predators, and develop his relationship with God. These experiences may have seemed insignificant to others, but they were crucial in preparing David for his future role as a leader. What David learned in private became the foundation for his public success. Preparation is not about instant results, it is about enduring growth. In our fast-paced world, there is often a desire to skip the process and go straight to the promise. However, God's timing is perfect and His process is intentional. Joseph, another example from Scripture, received a vision of greatness as a young man, but he did not step into his destiny immediately. Instead, he went through years of trials, including betrayal by his brothers, slavery, and imprisonment. These hardships were not detours, but part of God's divine preparation. In the pit, Joseph learned humility. In Potiphar's house, he learned stewardship. In prison, he learned patience and trust in God. By the time he stood before Pharaoh and was elevated to second in command of Egypt, he was ready to handle the responsibilities of leadership with wisdom and grace. Preparation also involves pruning. This can be one of the most challenging aspects of the process because it requires letting go of things that hinder growth. Pruning is not punishment, it is refinement. Just as a gardener cuts away dead branches to encourage healthy growth, God removes habits, relationships, and mindsets that do not align with His purpose for our lives. This can be a painful experience, but it is necessary to prepare us for the elevation He has planned. When we hold on to what God is trying to remove, we delay our progress. True preparation requires surrender and trust in God's plan, even when it doesn't make sense. Another critical aspect of preparation is learning obedience. Obedience is the cornerstone of elevation because it demonstrates our willingness to align with God's will. In the preparation phase, God often tests our hearts to see if we are willing to follow Him, even when the path is unclear. Abraham's journey is a powerful example. Before God made him the father of nations, He tested Abraham's faith by asking him to leave his homeland and go to an unknown land. Abraham's obedience, even without knowing the details of God's plan, was a testament to his trust and readiness for elevation. Preparation is not just about external circumstances, it is also about internal transformation. God is not only interested in what we do, but in who we are becoming. Elevation without preparation can lead to pride, burnout, or failure because the foundation has not been properly established. God uses the preparation season to cultivate humility, integrity, and resilience. He shapes our character so that when we are elevated, we can withstand the pressures and challenges that come with greater responsibility. This process also teaches us dependence on God. In the preparation phase, we often encounter situations that stretch us beyond our limits. These moments are designed to deepen our reliance on God rather than our own abilities. Moses experienced this when God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. Initially, Moses doubted his ability to fulfill such a monumental task. But through his time in the wilderness, Moses learned to trust in God's provision and guidance. By the time he stood before Pharaoh, he was not relying on his own strength, but on the power of the one who sent him. Preparation also builds endurance. Elevation often comes with increased demands, responsibilities, and challenges. Without endurance, it is easy to falter under the weight of the calling. The preparation phase is where we develop the perseverance needed to navigate the complexities of leadership and influence. Paul, in his letters, often spoke about the importance of enduring trials and hardships. He understood that these experiences were not random but intentional tools that God used to strengthen and prepare him for the mission ahead. The preparation season is also a time of learning and growth. It is where we acquire the knowledge, skills, and wisdom needed for our next level. Whether it's through formal education, mentorship, or life experiences, God uses this time to equip us. Esther's journey is a prime example. Before she became queen and saved her people, she underwent months of preparation in the palace. This period was not just about physical beauty, but about learning the customs, protocols, and strategies that would position her for success in her role. Finally, preparation teaches us gratitude and stewardship. When we have gone through the process, we value the elevation more deeply because we understand the cost. We are more likely to steward the opportunities and blessings God gives us with care and responsibility. This perspective prevents us from taking God's favor for granted and encourages us to use our elevation for His glory rather than our own gain. Every moment of preparation is a step toward the fulfillment of God's purpose in our lives. While it may feel slow or even discouraging at times, it is in the preparation phase that God does His most transformative work. He is shaping us into vessels that can carry the weight of His plans, refining us to reflect His character, and equipping us to walk boldly into the destiny He has prepared. The journey may be long, but the reward is worth it. For it is through preparation that we are truly ready for elevation. Opposition is often one of the clearest indicators that you are walking in alignment with your divine calling. When God positions you for a purpose, it stirs both natural and spiritual realms. The opposition you face is not a sign of failure or disqualification. Instead, it serves as confirmation of your assignment. Those chosen by God will often encounter resistance because the enemy recognizes the potential impact of their obedience. Opposition is not meant to destroy you, but to strengthen your resolve, refine your character, and affirm your position in God's plan. From the beginning of time, we see this pattern in the lives of those who walked in obedience to God. Consider Nehemiah, who was called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. As soon as he began his work, opposition arose in the form of ridicule, threats, and plots against him. His enemies tried to discourage him and stop the work, but Nehemiah's resolve only grew stronger. The opposition he faced was evidence that he was on the right track. It confirmed the significance of his mission and the impact it would have on the people of Israel. Nehemiah did not allow the resistance to deter him. Instead, he used it as fuel to press forward, knowing that his work was ordained by God. Opposition often arises because your obedience threatens the status quo. When you step into the position God has called you to, it disrupts systems, challenges norms, and exposes lies. This is why those who are called to leadership, influence, or innovation often face criticism, rejection, and adversity. The enemy understands that your success is not just about you. It has the potential to transform lives, shift atmospheres, and advance God's kingdom. Therefore, opposition is not just a reaction to your actions. It is a preemptive strike against the impact you are destined to make. One of the most profound examples of opposition confirming position is found in the life of Jesus. From the moment of his birth, opposition surrounded him. King Herod sought to kill him as an infant because he recognized the threat Jesus posed to his throne. Throughout his ministry, Jesus faced constant resistance from religious leaders who felt threatened by his teachings, miracles, and growing influence. Yet every act of opposition only served to highlight his authority and purpose. Even in his crucifixion, what the enemy intended for destruction became the ultimate victory. The opposition Jesus faced confirmed that he was exactly where he needed to be, fulfilling the will of his Father. Opposition also serves as a refining tool. When you face resistance, it tests your faith, strengthens your perseverance, and sharpens your focus. It forces you to rely on God rather than your own strength. Joseph's life is a testament to this truth. After receiving a vision from God about his future, he was met with intense opposition from his brothers, who sold him into slavery. His journey included betrayal, false accusations, and imprisonment, yet every setback was a step toward his divine position. Through opposition, Joseph's character was refined, his faith was deepened, and his leadership skills were developed. By the time he was elevated to second in command of Egypt, he was fully prepared to fulfill his God-given assignment. Opposition often reveals who is truly for you and who is against you. When God positions you, not everyone will celebrate or support you. Some will try to undermine your efforts, question your motives, or sow seeds of doubt. This can be painful, especially when it comes from people you trust or respect. However, opposition has a way of exposing the hearts of those around you. It separates those who are genuinely aligned with your vision from those who are not. This clarity is essential as you move forward, because not everyone can go with you to the next level. It is also important to recognize that opposition can be internal as well as external. Fear, self-doubt, and insecurity often rise up when you step into a new level of responsibility or influence. These internal struggles are just as much a part of the opposition as external resistance. The enemy often uses these tactics to try to derail you from your purpose. However, overcoming these internal battles strengthens your faith and builds resilience. When you confront your fears and push past your insecurities, you are declaring that God's power in you is greater than any obstacle you face. The key to navigating opposition is to keep your eyes fixed on God. When you understand that opposition is confirmation of your position, it shifts your perspective. Instead of seeing resistance as a sign to retreat, you begin to see it as a sign to press forward. You recognize that if the enemy is fighting you, it is because you are advancing into territory that he does not want you to occupy. This understanding gives you the courage to stand firm, even in the face of intense adversity. Opposition also creates opportunities for God to demonstrate his power and faithfulness. When you face challenges that seem insurmountable, it sets the stage for God to show up in miraculous ways. The Red Sea did not part until the Israelites faced the impossibility of crossing it. Goliath was not defeated until David stepped onto the battlefield. These moments of opposition became opportunities for God's glory to be revealed and for his people to be strengthened in their faith. When God positions you, the enemy will do everything in his power to oppose you. But this opposition is not. Your response to opposition determines how far you will go in your calling. When you choose to see resistance as confirmation rather than condemnation, you are able to endure with faith and perseverance. Every obstacle becomes an opportunity to grow, every setback a setup for a comeback, and every challenge a chance to glorify God. Opposition may come, but it cannot stop the plans of God for your life. Instead, it only confirms that His hand is upon you and that you are walking in His purpose. When God calls someone, He ensures they are fully equipped to fulfill the purpose He has assigned to them. This truth is woven throughout history and Scripture, demonstrating that God's calling is never dependent on human qualifications but on divine provision. It is not our own abilities, strengths, or resources that determine the outcome of our calling. It is God's power working in and through us. The one who calls us is faithful to provide everything we need for the journey, even when we feel inadequate or unprepared. God often chooses the least likely candidates to accomplish His greatest works. This pattern is intentional because it highlights His sovereignty and power. When He called Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses questioned his ability to speak effectively. He saw his limitations as a barrier to fulfilling the mission, but God reminded him that He, the Creator of the universe, would be with him. God equipped Moses with signs, wonders, and the words he needed to confront Pharaoh and lead a nation to freedom. What Moses lacked in himself, God supplied abundantly, proving that his calling comes with His provision. The process of equipping is not always immediate. It often unfolds over time. God equips us through experiences, trials, and challenges that prepare us for what lies ahead. David was anointed as king while still a young shepherd, but he did not ascend to the throne immediately. Instead, he spent years tending sheep, learning to trust God, and facing battles that strengthened his faith and courage. Each step of the journey was part of God's equipping process. By the time David faced Goliath, he was ready because God had already trained him in the fields and in the wilderness. Equipping often involves teaching us to rely on God rather than ourselves. When Gideon was called to deliver Israel from the Midianites, he doubted his ability to lead. He saw himself as the weakest in his family and unfit for the task. Yet God assured him, "I will be with you." Gideon's victory was not dependent on the size of his army or his strategic skills, but on God's power. By reducing Gideon's army to just 300 men, God made it clear that the victory would come from him alone. This principle is a reminder that when God calls us, He equips us in ways that glorify Him, not us. God's equipping also comes in the form of spiritual gifts and abilities. Every individual called by God is uniquely designed with gifts that align with their purpose. These gifts are not given for personal gain, but for the benefit of others and the advancement of God's kingdom. Paul, in his letters, often emphasized the importance of using spiritual gifts for the common good. Whether it is the gift of teaching, leadership, encouragement, or service, God provides the tools needed to fulfill His calling. These gifts are activated and strengthened as we step out in faith and obedience. Equipping is not limited to what we have within ourselves. It also includes the people and resources God places around us. He often brings mentors, allies, and communities into our lives to support and guide us. When God called Esther to save her people, He positioned Mordecai as a source of wisdom and encouragement. Mordecai's guidance helped Esther understand the weight of her calling and gave her the courage to act. God equips us through relationships, ensuring we are not alone on the journey. God's equipping also prepares us to face opposition and challenges. He strengthens our character, builds our resilience, and teaches us to trust Him in the face of adversity. When the disciples were called to spread the gospel, they faced persecution, rejection, and trials. Yet God equipped them with the Holy Spirit, empowering them to perform miracles, preach boldly, and endure hardships. The same Spirit that equipped the disciples equips us today, enabling us to fulfill our calling with courage and faith. Equipping often requires a willingness to grow and learn. God does not call us to remain stagnant, but to continually develop into the people He created us to be. This growth happens through seasons of preparation, where God stretches our faith, sharpens our skills, and refines our character. These seasons may feel uncomfortable, but they are necessary for our development. Joseph's years in slavery and prison were not wasted. They were part of the process that prepared him to manage Egypt's rich resources and save nations from famine. Even when we feel weak or inadequate, God's equipping is sufficient. Paul experienced this when he faced a thorn in the flesh that he asked God to remove. God's response was, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." This profound truth reminds us that our weaknesses are not obstacles to God's plans, they are opportunities for His strength to be revealed. When we rely on Him, we find that His grace and power are more than enough to carry us through. God's equipping is also a process of aligning our hearts with His. He prepares us not just for what we are called to do, but for who we are called to become. The work He does in us is just as important as the work He does through us. This inward transformation enables us to reflect His character and represent Him well in every aspect of our calling. God's equipping is comprehensive and intentional. He provides wisdom for decisions, strength for challenges, and grace for every step of the journey. He does not call us to a task without preparing us to succeed in it. His faithfulness ensures that what He starts in us, He will bring to completion. Every trial, lesson, and experience is part of His divine equipping, shaping us into vessels ready to fulfill His purpose and bring Him glory. When God calls you, the impact of your obedience goes far beyond your personal life. The calling He places on you is designed to influence others, shift circumstances, and create ripples that extend into future generations. It is never just about you, it is always about His greater purpose and His kingdom agenda. This perspective transforms how you view your journey and challenges as you come to understand that your actions have a far-reaching significance that you may not immediately perceive. Throughout history, God has used individuals to enact change that influenced entire nations and communities. Consider the story of Abraham. When God called him, He promised to make him the father of many nations. But this promise was not just for Abraham's personal blessing, it was a covenant that would extend to his descendants and bless all the families of the earth. Abraham's faith and obedience initiated a legacy that impacted not only his immediate family, but generations to come. The significance of his journey reminds us that our choices and actions have a profound influence beyond what we can see. God often places us in positions where our obedience can create opportunities for others. Esther is a prime example of this truth. When she was chosen as queen, it wasn't merely for her personal elevation. God positioned her to save her people from destruction. Her willingness to risk her life by approaching the king without invitation was not only an act of courage, but a pivotal moment that preserved an entire nation. Esther's obedience reminds us that our calling is often tied to the deliverance, empowerment, or upliftment of others. God's plans for us are intricately connected to His plans for those around us. The impact of your calling often manifests in ways you may not immediately understand. Joseph's journey is another testament to this truth. When his brothers sold him into slavery, Joseph endured years of hardship and betrayal. Yet, God used those experiences to position him as a leader in Egypt. When famine struck, Joseph's wisdom and preparation saved countless lives, including his own family. What appeared to be personal suffering was, in reality, God's way of orchestrating a greater plan. Joseph's story illustrates that your trials and victories are not just for you, they are part of a larger tapestry designed to benefit others. When you walk in obedience to God's calling, your life becomes a testimony that inspires and encourages others. The challenges you overcome, the faith you demonstrate, and the victories you achieve serve as a beacon of hope for those who are watching. David's triumph over Goliath was not just a personal victory, it was a moment that galvanized an entire nation. His faith and courage inspired the Israelites to believe in God's power and stand against their enemies. Similarly, your faithfulness in the face of adversity can encourage others to trust God in their own battles. The impact of your obedience often extends beyond your immediate influence to future generations. The legacy you leave is not just about material wealth or achievements, it is about the principles, values, and faith you pass on. Moses' obedience to lead the Israelites out of Egypt paved the way for their descendants to inherit the promised land. Even though Moses did not enter the promised land himself, his faithfulness ensured that God's covenant with his people was fulfilled. Your calling may involve laying the groundwork for others to build upon, creating opportunities that outlive you. The ripple effect of your calling can also transform communities and systems. When Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, his work restored not only the city's physical structure, but also the morale and identity of the people. His leadership brought unity, purpose, and hope to a community that had been in disarray. Your obedience to God's calling can similarly bring restoration and renewal to the environments you are placed in, whether it is your workplace, family, or community. Your influence is not limited to those who share your faith or beliefs. God often uses his people to impact the lives of others in unexpected ways. Daniel's commitment to God, even in a foreign land, gained him favor and influence in the Babylonian court. His wisdom and integrity led to the recognition of God's power by kings and officials who did not know him. Your obedience can serve as a witness to others, drawing them closer to God and revealing his glory in ways that words alone cannot achieve. The impact of your calling is also spiritual. When you step into your purpose, you engage in a spiritual battle that affects more than just your immediate circumstances. Your obedience advances God's kingdom and pushes back the forces of darkness. Paul's missionary journeys not only established churches but also shifted spiritual atmospheres in regions where the gospel had never been preached. His work continues to influence countless lives through the teachings and letters he left behind. Your actions, too, have spiritual implications that reach beyond what is visible. Even the small, seemingly insignificant acts of obedience can have a profound impact. When the boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish offered his lunch to Jesus, it resulted in the miraculous feeding of thousands. What may seem minor in your hands becomes extraordinary when placed in God's hands. This truth reminds us that no act of obedience is too small to be used for his glory. Your willingness to follow God in the little things can lead to outcomes far greater than you imagine. Ultimately, the impact of your calling is a reflection of God's power and faithfulness. It is he who multiplies your efforts, opens doors, and connects your obedience to his larger plan. The journey may not always be easy, and the results may not always be immediate, but you can trust that your faithfulness is making a difference. When God calls you, he is not just working in you, he is working in you. He is working through you to touch lives, change circumstances, and leave a lasting legacy. Your life becomes a vessel for his purposes, a channel through which his love, grace, and power flow to the world. The journey of being chosen by God is one of profound purpose, preparation, and impact. It is a calling that reshapes your perspective, refines your character, and aligns you with a divine plan far greater than yourself. From equipping you with everything needed for the journey to refining you through opposition, to ensuring your impact transcends generations, God's hand is evident every step of the way. When God chooses you, he empowers you to overcome challenges, equips you to fulfill your purpose, and positions you to influence lives in ways you may not immediately see. Your obedience becomes a testimony, your faith a beacon, and your life a channel for God's power and glory. The calling is never just about you, it is about advancing his kingdom, inspiring others, and leaving a legacy that echoes through eternity. Embrace the calling with courage and faith, knowing that the one who called you is faithful to complete the work he has begun in you. Trust that every trial is preparing you, every step is purpose, and every act of obedience is creating ripples of impact far beyond what you can imagine. You are chosen, equipped, and sent by God to make a difference, and in him, your labor is never in vain.